Before we get started, please go over to Amazon.com and grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice. If you have an African-American son in public school, you need this book because I teach you the many ways that public schools mistreat African-American boys and what you can do to help your son. So go over there and get your copy immediately. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're doing fine. So, while we were enjoying some of the All-Star festivities this past weekend, this past Friday night, Donald Trump and MAGA were doing what they have committed themselves to doing, and that is rolling African Americans back to pre-civil rights days, to Jim Crow. What am I talking about? I'm talking about a Dear Colleague letter that the Department of Education released to universities and primary schools across America. And I'm telling you, it is awful. The hostility in this letter is indescribable. It made me so angry. I thought that I would write down, in fact, I began to write out what I wanted to say about the Trump administration. And keep in mind, we're only, 3 weeks into this? We got another 4 years of this anti-Black hostility. Here's what I said. Let's go to another screen. Trump is the most openly hostile president. Let me put it full screen. Is the most openly hostile president towards Black Americans since Reagan. His administration is tearing down civil rights protections, wiping out DEI programs, and firing thousands of federal employees, hitting Black workers the hardest. He wants to eliminate the Department of Education, DOE. Still, in the meantime, he's using the DOE to defund schools that promote racial equity, restricting race-conscious admissions, and cutting federal support for diversity programs. His team is twisting Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, and that's what I'm going to talk about here in just a moment. To ban race-conscious financial aid, scholarships, and hiring. Yes, financial aid, scholarships, and hiring. Gutting programs that have helped Black students and educators for decades. If this keeps up, his second term will arguably do more structural damage to Black communities than any president in modern history. Hello, everyone. I got great news. The merch is finally here. We've been waiting and waiting, but we can finally begin branding our channel. But we need your help to get our brand out there. If you like what we provide and like what you see, please go to the channel and grab your hoodie, your t-shirt, your mug, and we got more designs and products on the way. Just visit our YouTube channel at the Defiant Lawyers Network. Also, we will donate a portion of each dollar you spend on our merch towards some nonprofit. And remember, as always, stay woke. That's how bad this is. And again, keep in mind, we're only 3 weeks into a 4-year term. And we've already seen tremendous anti-Black hostility. All right, so let's go now and look at this letter that I'm talking about, this horrendous letter, okay? We're going to read it. I'm going to read some of it. Can't read it all, but we're going to read some of it. It's dated February 14th, 2025. Dear colleague, discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin is illegal and morally reprehensible. You think? Yeah, we have been the victim of that junk for 400 years, and we're still victimized by that mess. Accordingly, I write to clarify and reaffirm the non-discrimination obligations of schools and other entities that receive federal financial assistance from the United States Department of Education, the department. This letter explains and reiterates existing legal requirements under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution, and other relevant authorities. What I want you to notice first and foremost, everything he just mentioned, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and other relevant authorities were added to the Constitution to fight discrimination against African American people. As I explained in a recent video, they have hijacked, co-opted these legal protections for African Americans, and now they use them against us under the false pretense of reverse discrimination. That's where we are. That is the result of voting Donald Trump into office. And I'm going to be honest with you. The more and more and more this goes on, the angrier I get with you black people who supported this man and continue to support him. The angrier it makes me. And I'm hoping that it's making the African American community itself angrier, because they need to see that you sold us out. By the way, you sold your own family out, voting for this anti-black hostility. Anyway, let's go back to this letter. In recent years, American educational institutions have discriminated against students on the basis of race. Yeah, right, we know all about that, including white and Asian students. Give me a break with that junk. White students have had all types of privilege. All types of privilege. And what discrimination Asian students have experienced, it is not because of black people. We're not in those positions of power to discriminate against Asian students. And they themselves should know better than to join hands with the folks who are discriminating against all of us. Many of whom come from disadvantaged backgrounds and low-income families. None of them have lower incomes and lower net worth than African Americans. Okay? The average white family has 10 times more wealth than the average black family. And yet, letters like this and people like this try to make it seem like the most victimized person in America is the white person. That's preposterous. It is the white person who has benefited from systemic racism. It is the reason why the average white family has over 10 times the wealth of the average black family. And yet they've been able to flip this and make it sound like and seem like it's white people who are the true victims of 400 years of systemic racism. Let's go back. This is crazy on its face. These institutions embrace of pervasive and repugnant race-based preferences and other forms of racial discrimination have emanated throughout every facet of academia. I got to point out that all the programs that they are trying to wipe off the planet were programs to simply give African Americans an equitable chance at competing, because systemic racism is still a huge part of this country. A huge part of this country. Let's go back. There's more here. Lot more. This says educational institutions have toxically indoctrinated students with the false premise that the United States is built upon, quote, systemic and structural racism and advanced discriminatory policies and practices. Are you kidding? America has always been built upon systemic and structural racism. We're talking about a country that enslaved, that had black people listed in the law as chattel property. And then for another 100 years, segregated blacks as inferior. That was just in the 70s. So when did systemic and structural racism, when did it end? What year? 72, 73, 74, 85, 89, 91, 2003. When did it end? It never has. This is a preposterous, ridiculous argument for anybody to say that America is not systemically and structurally racist when for over 350 years out of the 400 years we've been here, there was legalized systemic and structural racism. Because after slavery, they implemented and enacted black code laws. And those laws were just overturned or repealed in the mid-60s under Lyndon Johnson. The Civil Rights Act of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65, the Fair Housing Act of 68, the Elementary and Secondary School Act, the Higher Education Act, and so on. That was just done in my lifetime. So are you suggesting that the systemic and structural racism that was written into the law has just suddenly, poof, disappeared? This is crazy. But they're able to get away with it because they're in power. And they're in power because an overwhelming number of whites voted for this, and just enough blacks either voted for this or didn't vote. I'm telling you, 3 weeks into this presidency, you should see that Kamala Harris would have been better for African Americans on her worst day. And if you don't see it, you will. You will. Or you're just on their side. You're just on their side. All right, this goes on to say, proponents of these discriminatory practices have attempted to further justify them, particularly during the last 4 years, under the banner of diversity, equity, and inclusion, smuggling racial stereotypes and explicit race consciousness into everyday training, programming, and discipline. In other words, during the Biden administration, who was literally the Biden-Harris administration that was literally fighting for African-American people. And yet some African-American people rejected them listening to this disinformation that comes from black conservatives and pro-black imposters, went and supported this man and continue to support him. And I can already tell you that black conservatives and pro-black imposters are going to justify this letter. They're going to say things like, oh, this doesn't impact black people, or this is good for black people, or these types of letters just show that black people need to stop being victims. They're going to justify this. They're going to find a reason to say that Trump and MAGA didn't do anything wrong with this letter. Targeting black students' financial aid. They're going to find a reason to say this is good. This is not really going to hurt black people. Watch. Watch what I tell you. And by the way, the people who are listening to them are so low information that they're not going to fact check them. These folks don't read, so they are subject to believe whatever these black conservatives and pro-black imposters tell them. It's almost like being in a cult. Because again, they're not going to push back. They're not going to say, well, no, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, taking financial aid from black students who need it, That doesn't make any sense. So how are you justifying this? They typically are not going to do that. Instead, they're going to go along because they're low information. They don't have any basis upon which to push back. That's what we're dealing with. Let's go back. Obviously, we can't read the entire letter, but it goes on to say the Supreme Court's 2023 decision in Students for Fair Admission to Harvard. Now, I want you to pay close attention because they're going much further. As horrendous as that decision was back in 2023, these people take it even further than that. Watch this. Which clarified that the use of racial preferences in college admissions is unlawful. That is true. That is what that opinion was about, college admissions. But the Trump administration take it even further. Admissions is unlawful, sets forth a framework for evaluating the use of race by state actors and entities covered by Title VI. The court explained that, quote, classifying and assigning students based on their race, close quote, is lawful only if it satisfies strict scrutiny. I explained strict scrutiny to you in a couple of videos before. Those of you who are watching me for the first time, go back and look at prior videos, and I explain all of this to you. Every bit of this, which means that any use of race must be narrowly tailored that is necessary to achieve a compelling interest. All right, they go on to say, although SFFA addressed admissions decisions, the Supreme Court's holding applies more broadly. No, it does not. It applies only to admissions, not student loans, not student aid, not financial aid, not any of that, just to who gets admitted. But they are trying to take it further. They go on to say, at its core, the test is simple. If an educational institution treats a person of one race differently than it treats another person because of that person's race, the educational institution violates the law. Not necessarily. As they said, it must pass strict scrutiny. And the only thing that the court said did not pass strict scrutiny was admissions. Admissions. Federal law thus prohibits covered entities from using race in decisions, watch how broad this language is, pertaining to admissions, hiring. No, it didn't say anything about hiring. Promotion. It didn't say anything about promotion. Compensation. Didn't say anything about compensation. Financial aid. It said nothing. That case that struck down affirmative action said nothing about financial aid. Scholarships, nothing. Prizes, nothing. Administrative support, it says nothing about that. Discipline, it says nothing. That case that they're using says nothing. Housing, graduation ceremonies, and all other aspects of student, academic, and campus life. Put simply, educational institutions may neither separate or segregate students based on race nor distribute funds or burdens based on race. That case only dealt with admissions. If these issues go in front of the court, if a state school, in other words, considers race when it comes to housing, discipline, scholarships, of course, if it harms, it should be struck down. But if they're considering race to help African American students in terms of financial aid, prizes, administrative support, it should pass strict scrutiny because that's why these laws were put in the Constitution in the first place. Do you follow me? If it helps African Americans, the use of race should be allowed. If it hurts African Americans, the use of race should not be allowed. It should not pass strict scrutiny. And why are African Americans an exception? Because for 246 years, We were chattel property. Whites stole our labor and never, ever gave us the ability economically to overcome those 246 years. And then whites followed that up with another 100 years of Jim Crow and stole our labor again under another name, such as sharecropping, convict leasing, and on and on. And no one else in this country, Asians, people from Latino countries, no one has suffered what African Americans have suffered. And so I hate when I hear some person, some white person or some Asian person say things like, well, I didn't do anything wrong. Yeah, but you have benefited from the wrong that was done to African Americans. So you may have to, or at least you should, have to give up some of what you have been able to do in order to repair the damage that whites have done to the African American community. Of course, that's reparations. But we know what they're doing. If not, let me tell you. I think that they're going to use this type of case eventually. I don't see why they wouldn't. To say any funding that's going to HBCUs is itself unconstitutional. Any funding. HBCUs are in jeopardy. I've been telling you that for years. They're in jeopardy. There is nothing to stop these folks from using the law against HBCUs and anything else related to race or anything else that is designed to benefit African American people. They're going at all of it, every bit of it. And now just think about this. Just think about this. So they did away with any sort of consideration of race when African Americans are applying to white schools. Why is that bad? Because whites make up the majority in this country, and they got the best schools. I mean, they run the Harvards and the Yales and the Stanfords and the University of Chicago's and Duke's and so forth. They run all that, where you tend to get a better education. You got better resources. You got the top tier professors. So they don't ever have to admit blacks, Asians. They can fill their schools with just whites. But those schools know that the education experience is a lot better when the student body is diverse. And they know that a lot of African Americans who may not have a 4.0 or a 5.0 because of the situation that they came up in, but their 3.5 means more than that 5.0. Because as you hear me say all the time, it's not how far you've come. It's how far you've come from. When you are able to graduate high school as an African American person with a 3.5 grade point average out of 4, and your mom was on crack, and your dad is in prison, your grandfather was in prison, and your grandmother, you got all these issues, and you go to bed at night oftentimes, you went to bed not knowing what you were going to eat. You had to share what little you had with your little brothers. And all of that stuff you dealt with because of the legacy of white supremacy. And your family didn't have the resources to help you take a study course for the SAT or the ACT. So you had to study in between babysitting your kid, your little brothers, your siblings. You see, on an empty stomach. And yet you still managed to get a 3.5 out of that. You see, they don't want to acknowledge the damage that they've done to our community. And now they're going further and saying, and we're not going to allow you to get any sort of remedial measure because of that. In fact, if you bring that up, we're going to accuse you of playing the victim card. You see, those are the people that we're dealing with. Those are the people that some of you black people literally supported. Literally supported. People who despise you. Grin in your face long enough to get your vote, but they despise you. They are descendants of the Confederacy. And they never stopped fighting us. Since the Civil War, they never stopped. And some of you are going to vote for them because of what some black conservative is telling you, who is likely doing very well supporting white supremacy. You see, blacks who support white supremacy, yeah, they can get paid. Yeah, white conservatives will pay them big money. Big money. Make them very wealthy so long as they just continue to carry the water of the white supremacists. We see that with Clarence Thomas. And there are many others. We got 4 years of this junk coming down the pipe. Now, some of you have been asking me, what are we going to do? Well, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. That's why I'm not releasing as many videos, because I'm taking a lot of my time. And I'm putting things in place to create a movement, a spiritual movement that will have implications in the political and economic and legal world. Okay? I introduced you to this movement some months ago. AMCA. AMCA. Demanding justice, discipling righteousness. This is based on the Holy Scriptures. Psalm 89:14, where God says he established his throne and his kingdom on justice and righteousness. This is the only way to fight these people. We must rely on God to help us, as our ancestors did. There is no way our ancestors could have survived and even overcame slavery and Jim Crow without relying on the Lord Jesus Christ. Let me be specific. On the Lord. They were all Christian people. All of them. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey. They were all Christians. Clergy, civil rights movement, the same thing. We have always turned to the God of the Bible in times like this, and we can't stop now. So, AMCA. And for those of you who've been rocking with this channel, you know, if you're being very, if you're looking closely, AMCA, the name has changed some. It was AMKA. I've added an A. Because now it means African Americans mobilizing for kingdom advancement. African Americans mobilizing for kingdom advancement. And as the subtitle says, we'll be demanding justice, but working on our community as well, discipling righteousness. And the two of those together will make us strong and enable us to overcome any and everything. So I'm working on a response here. I'm working on a movement. All right? It's going to take God to help us. As the Bible says, if God be for us, who can be against us? Even the richest man in the world. Even the richest man in the world. He is no match for the Lord Jesus Christ. No match. As a matter of fact, the Bible tells us in the book of Revelation that all of those wicked, racist, rich people will one day run from the face of God and his judgment, begging to die and can't. So our faith must be in the Lord Almighty. But we got to do work too, because faith without works is dead faith. So we got a lot of work to do as well. I will talk more about it in the days to come. In the meantime, again, don't forget AMCA, and definitely don't forget, no matter what they try to do, to stay woke.